Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. So, when we're talking about courage as being a virtue, Aristotle has a lot to say about this. And this is one of the ones that he's actually most interested in and develops to the fullest degree of description. We automatically think of one vice that's opposed to it, right? What is that? Cowardice, right? Is there anything that's to the other extreme of courage? A kind of fake sort of courage, yeah.
Rashness.
Yeah. When somebody is rash or foolhardy or sometimes we just say crazy, right? They're doing the things like a courageous person, but they're doing them with a different motivation, and it's going to pan out differently in the circumstances that they're doing it in. Now, where should we put these? It really depends on how we're looking at it. Courage and these vices are concerned with fear. But they're also concerned with something that Aristotle thinks is in a certain way the opposite of fear, confidence, which is also a feeling, an emotion. Now, Aristotle's not just talking about having the emotions, he's talking about what we do with the emotions, how we act. But the emotions are very important. So if we want to look at it in terms of excess of fear, then we would have to place the coward over here, right? And we would place the rash person over here. The rash person may actually lack fear altogether. People who lack fear altogether are actually very dangerous. You want to stay away from them because, if you get them mad at you, there's nothing to keep them from doing anything, and they'll probably get you, if you're a friend with them, into all sorts of crazy situations that you don't want to be in yourself, particularly if you're courageous, but especially if you're, cowardly yourself. And Aristotle's not saying that everybody, has fully developed one of these traits. You could be sort of wavering in between this, or you could be wavering over here. Our characters aren't always fixed. At your age, you have a lot more control over changing your character than somebody does at my age, roughly twice your age. But we still have some control over it. So fear and confidence. The courageous person feels fear and confidence to the right degree. So part of it is about the right amount. Coward feels too much fear, right? The rash person feels not enough. And instead, they often feel too much confidence. Coward, not enough confidence. So is it just a matter of how much you feel, the intensity of it? Aristotle says no. There's other rights involved. What are some of the other things that could qualify somebody being courageous, that would help you tell them apart from, say, somebody who's foolhardy? So that's just the amount. What else? Yeah.
The things they use it for, like the motives behind it.
Motivation. Okay. Call this right reason.
Yeah.
Aristotle will say that the courageous person is courageous so that they can do noble, worthwhile things. This is actually going to help us strip away some things that look like courage from things that actually aren't courage. The foolhardy person might be acting courageously because they want everyone to think they're such a, tough guy or something like that. The person who's a coward might have all sorts of motivations that we'll explore. So that's one important thing. What else? So right reason. What are other right things that can come up with respect to this? What about the right occasion? Do we feel fear all the time? I mean, if you do, you've got a problem, right? Probably need some anti-anxiety medication if you feel it all the time. Do any of you never feel fear? Because then I want to stay away from you. Yeah. Certainly don't want to give you a bad grade. Because who knows what you'll do. We should feel fear towards the right things. So let's call this the right occasions. And this is worth dwelling on a little bit. So the person who's rash doesn't feel fear when they ought to feel fear in situations where it's natural to, or it's right to feel fear. The person who's a coward, they may feel fear when they ought to feel fear, but they probably also feel fear more intensely then, and they will also feel fear in occasions where they should. They're scared of things that they shouldn't be afraid of. That's part of what makes them a coward. So let's think about some of the things Aristotle talks about, and let's think about some of the things that we're afraid of. He talks about death. Is that something that scares you? It should. If not, again, you're probably on the rash part, because it's natural to fear death. We're lucky because we live in a society where most of us live past childhood, and then tend to live fairly long lives. But if you wanted to get yourself killed, it wouldn't be hard. Just walk out on a 9W right there. People are driving. They're supposed to be driving 40 miles an hour. Walk down to the part where everybody's driving 60, and they're not going to stop, and that would end it. Now imagine you're by that area and somebody suddenly pushes you. You'd feel a sense of fear, right? Even if there's no cars coming? Because that's a dangerous area, right? What are other things like that happens? Did any of you ever get a sense of vertigo when you're in a high place? You feel like you might fall off? You feel kind of a sense of fear? That's natural. That's your body saying, get away from there. You might fall off. Don't go close to that edge. That's stupid. You have to overcome that in order to do things near that. Does that happen to any of you if you're watching something in a movie where somebody is bungee jumping or hang gliding? It happens to me. My body kicks in and I feel kind of a sense of vertigo. Maybe it happens to you. That makes sense, right? What are other things that we're afraid of? Aristotle talks about poverty. I think this is something you can relate to. Most people are a few steps away, a few paychecks away from losing it all, even in our industrialized societies. It's tough to find people who actually have saved up enough where they could go without a job for 6 months or a year. You guys are starting out, many of you, in a very tough economy without a lot of tangible assets to work with other than your positive attitude, skills, internship, that sort of stuff. That should be scary. If it is, that's okay. That's probably in the just right range. If it was the 90s and you were terrified about going on the job market when there were tons and tons of jobs and it was super easy to get them, then if you were super afraid, you might be a coward. But now I think it actually makes sense to feel a sense of fear. Not to be overcome by fear. Not so that you never send any resumes out. But to feel sort of a healthy sense of, crap, this thing that I don't want could happen to me. Disease, he talks about that as well. Are we afraid of diseases? Not as much as, ooh, something break? Not as much as in previous societies, right, where, again, a lot of people didn't live past childhood, but, there's some pretty scary diseases out there, aren't there? Like, what are some of the ones that you're most worried about at this point? Yeah.
Like ones of the mind, like Alzheimer's.
Oh, interesting. I wouldn't have predicted that, but yeah, it takes away a lot from you. Yeah.
I mean, cancer.
Yeah, I mean, now we know a bit more about it, but and treatment rates are better, but people are still dying of it, and it's painful too when you do. What else? None of you are going to get polio because we're all vaccinated, right? But yeah.
Parkinson's is a pretty bad one.
Yeah. Similar to Alzheimer's and a lot of what happens with that. These degenerative diseases. You know how we know that people are so susceptible to them? Because people are living long enough to actually get sick of these things that they wouldn't have because something else would have killed them before that. We have heart disease, we have all these superbugs that are coming out. That's pretty scary. Think about the fact that cholera, some of the strains of that are developing resistances. It's getting tougher to fight malaria. People die of West Nile virus here in the United States. Lyme's disease, it can kill you. It usually doesn't, but it screws you up pretty bad. This is one of the worst areas for that. Our dogs have had it twice. I've had it once since I moved here. Yeah, it sucks, doesn't it? And the worst thing about that is then you have to take that doxycycline, which makes you sick for like a month afterwards. If you're afraid of that, that's reasonable. That makes sense. Now, would it make sense for you to, like, every time you go outside, be obsessive in checking yourself for ticks? No, that would be a little bit too much. What else? So disease. He says insult to, and he's talking about men in this case, insult to one's wife or one's kids. I think we could generalize this more widely for anybody to be afraid of other people hurting or maligning their family, their friends. That is something that is reasonable to feel a sense of fear about. The envy of others. Our society is just as envious as Greek society was. When you succeed, are all of your friends going to be super elated about your success, or family members? Some of them yes, some of them no. And sometimes being successful can actually make enemies of people. And it's reasonable to feel fear about that, to a certain degree. So these are all things that we find fearful. There are other things that Aristotle says we, as human beings, find so fearful that it would be irrational not to feel a sense of fear towards them. That it's actually okay sometimes to be overcome by fear over them. What would be things really, really scary like that? Where somebody might be able to get you to do something by threatening you with this. And not just like, an idle threat, like, I'm going to do this to you, next week, but yeah.
Do you things like you've already mentioned that might stand out more than others?
Like what?
Like the one that insults one's family.
Oh, like I'm going to ruin your brother or sister or your husband, or yeah, I'm going to reveal what they've done to the world, and your family will be destroyed forever.
Even just like their safety.
I'll not only hurt but torture you. Yeah, that would be extremely scary. Just thinking about somebody doing terrible things to my kids right now makes me feel a sense of anxiety. Being threatened with torture yourself, that would be really, really scary, wouldn't it? Not like, just waterboarding torture, which, isn't going to kill you, but like pull your nails out kind of torture, that kind of stuff. I'd be pretty scared. Aristotle would be pretty scared. You ought to be pretty scared. If you feel no sense of fear towards that whatsoever, you're probably lacking something. The sort of things that go on in horror movies. You've all seen horror movies, right? You have some masked stranger with a, pick whatever you like. Machete, chainsaw, scary hands. What else have they got? Knives. Well, that's pretty scary, right? You ought to be scared of that sort of thing. Sometimes we make the mistake of watching those movies right before we're going to go to bed. Ones that are the scariest are like, the ghost movies, like The Grudge, or The Ring, or Paranormal Activity. Because you know why those are so scary? Because they suggest to you that maybe something could come out of the TV, that while you're watching it, maybe, just maybe, something could happen. It is reasonable to be scared by those things. So, Aristotle says that what's really key here is feeling the fear to the right degree, for the right reason, on the right occasions, and then having the right response. Do you resist your fear? Do you rely on the bit of confidence that you do have to overcome that fear? Now this is interesting because this requires some active choice, doesn't it, on the person's part? You have to do some work on yourself before you can actually resist what it is that you're being called on to resist. And the paradigm for Aristotle is actually battlefield courage. He says that in its fullest sense, it's actually going out and fighting when, that puts your life at risk. And remember, these guys, fighting for them, how many of you have seen those Greek movies like Troy or the 300? Okay, so you know what that was like. They had a shield, they had a bit of armor, they weren't covered in armor, but some parts were armored, and then they'd have a spear, and they could jab somebody with it or throw it, and then they'd have a sword. And that was pretty much it. And every other guy around them had the same equipment. And all those guys over there are aiming at killing them. And they're supposed to try to kill them before that happens. I think it might be Patton who said, people say that, you should be willing to give your life for your country. And he said, no, that's got it all wrong. You want to make that other poor bastard give his life for his country. That's the goal of doing things. But that's pretty scary. It's not like shooting somebody, and even firefights today, those are pretty scary too. But imagine you can't just shoot somebody. You got to actually jab a spear into him while he's trying to do the same to you. And there might be another one of his buddies behind you about to do the same. That's pretty scary. A lot of people would throw away their shields and take off and say, screw this, I'll see you guys later. That would be showing cowardice, right? On the other hand, being berserk and just running into battle, that's foolhardy. There's something lacking in the person who does that. Oftentimes they make terrible soldiers, by the way, people who are rash and foolhardy. You can't rely on them to actually follow orders. They're always looking for a fight. And Aristotle actually says something really interesting about this. He says some of the people who are over here, actually, they're missing a sense of fear. Some of them are actually secretly cowards who are so obsessed with how people view them that they put on a really bold front to appear courageous when they really aren't. And you can tell this because when the going gets really, really tough, they cave. Whereas the courageous person doesn't. The courageous person is willing to risk death, risk dismemberment, risk all sorts of scary things for the sake of something good. Not just to make a big name for themselves, but to defend some sort of good that needs to be defended. Now, I don't think a lot of us are ever going to be on the battlefield, thank God. Right? What are other ways, other venues in which we require courage? Let's think of other ones that actually involve life and limb first. Are there other venues in which a person,
Are you talking about professions or more so everyday lifestyle?
Could be either. So professions works just fine.
Police officers?
Yeah. Firefighters.
Firefighters. Even EMTs sometimes are faced with
Yeah.
situations like that.
Anybody who's got to deal with the threat of disease, too. So in a way, nurses, not so much doctors, because they sort of in and out a lot of the time, but nurses are on the front lines of battling disease. You know, they can get MRSA in the hospital just as easily as anybody else. Any other bodily things where we're being threatened with bodily harm, and we have to resist it. We have to resist our fear for the sake of accomplishing some good for something. Yeah.
Sorry, I was wrong.
Oh, okay. That's all right.
Even like people doing research too, like in labs, people trying to find cures, they're exposed to different types of bacteria all the time. Even us in the micro lab,
Yeah.
there's hundreds of bacteria in there that
That's true.
we're required to work with.
That's why you're supposed to wear gloves and suits and stuff like that. We know not everybody does that.
Any like social movement that's aimed towards like a better good, like I mean, there's not really
Yeah.
one particularly right now that I can say is an immediate danger, but if I can think back to like civil rights or something like
That's a great example. Being willing to take on the danger. I mean, you know, one sec. Martin Luther King had to have training sessions for the people who were going to be the marchers before they were allowed to march, because he knew that they were going to get their heads cracked and have dogs sit down them and get, these, very high pressure water cannons shot at them. And they had to be able to put up with that sort of thing without breaking and like just lapsing into complete rage, which I know I'd have a hard time with. And so they put them through gauntlets like that in order to help them build up a sense of courage. It was like training in virtue. Yeah.
Like building off of that, it's like a modern example. If the girls in the Middle East who are still like going to school instead.
Yeah.
And every day have to walk like 10 miles, different routes, so that they don't get caught and killed.
That would be a great example, a great contemporary example of displaying courage. That's not something you're going to be able to do if you don't actually have that trait developed, because at a certain point you'll be like, the hell with this, going back home. Now let's think about more broadly, not physical harm, but other things that we're afraid of, and occasions where we would have to put ourselves out there and risk something. What are the sort of things people risk or take risks on? Yeah.
Maybe your reputation.
Okay. Yeah, our reputations. Especially when we vouch for somebody and we're not completely sure whether they're up to things. Yeah. Oh, you. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe your job security. Sometimes
Yes.
if you're telling your boss like something's not going well and we should do this and something, if you stand up for something.
Yeah, it takes courage to actually tell somebody that they're doing the wrong thing, especially when they have something over you, like your performance review or your raise or whether you get hired or not. Yeah.
Financial risks too, like people who work with business and have to, decide to either go all in or
Okay. Yeah. I suppose gambling even would require a certain kind of courage. Innovation, taking risks to do something somebody hasn't done before, that requires courage. And you notice that the same sort of things can apply there. You can be foolhardy with respect to these, right? Think about telling your boss. There's ways to tell your boss that there's a problem in the company that are less alienating. But the rash person might just say, they come into the office, close the door. Look, I just have to tell you what's going on, and you don't want to do anything about it. Well, that's on you. That's probably not going to go too well. Yeah.
And the same family of things, like confronting a friend or a loved one, like that maybe has a problem or something.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, you're right. That's very tough to do. That requires courage. And if we don't do that sort of thing, if we give in, we'll eventually become cowards. And now here's where it gets very interesting. With virtues and vices, Aristotle notes not only do we have this structure of the mean and the excesses, the people at the different excesses think that they're actually in the middle position. And everybody else in the world is screwed up. So the rash person thinks that everybody else is a coward. And they call everybody, all sorts of names that we have to designate that. The cowardly person thinks everybody else is too risky. They do things that they shouldn't do. You know, they put themselves out there in cases where they shouldn't. They're exercising the right amount of prudence and courage and handling fears the way that they ought to be handled. The courageous person is the only person in this spectrum who really has a good sense of where, not only where they fit in, but where other people fit in. So it's interesting. You have to develop a trait through action, through choosing the right thing, and maybe starting out over here and, you know, gradually swinging here, or maybe starting out over here, where I did, and gradually swinging over here, before you end up seeing things correctly and being able to help other people too in the process. Because, you know, part of what it takes to learn how to be courageous is having other courageous people to look to as models to help, you know, give you some sort of idea of what it looks like in practice. Now, the only other thing I want to talk about with courage very quickly, Aristotle says that seeking or risking death isn't always courageous. If one is, now we talked about the rash person who does that because they just don't care, or they're, you know, obsessed with, you know, how people see them or things like that. There's other ways in which one could be a coward and seek death or risk death. And the examples that he gives are to escape the pains of poverty. When one is in love, one takes crazy risks that one shouldn't. And then if one is feeling, you know, terrible pain or sorrow or stuff like that. Aristotle says that's actually something more like cowardice. Because one is so afraid of those pains or not getting what one wants that one passes up, you know, what would normally be very fearful to us, death. And I think you could probably substitute other things in there as well, you know, job-related things. So, any questions about courage and its vices? Yeah.
Can you just repeat the last circumstance where it's not appropriate?
Oh, the last thing that I just said? Or? Aristotle thinks that there are some people who will risk death, which is normally a fearful thing, right?
Right.
Because they're motivated by wanting to escape poverty, or they're in love, or they are feeling some terrible sense of pain or sorrow. And those are all motivators for action. And they lead the person to not fear death. So it kind of looks like they're being courageous, but they're not really being courageous. So, you know, like we said, people in love, you know, in all these movies, the people who are in love do all sorts of crazy things that they normally never do. That's not really courage, Aristotle would say. It's not coming from a settled disposition. One way to tell if a person's actually courageous is it runs throughout their entire approach to things. It's not just in this one area. Like you wouldn't be courageous if you're only courageous at work and then timid at home, right? A courageous person, it has to be integrated into their. Any other questions about